Let me make sure that I'm doing the, oh, it is already on cloud recording. Okay. All right, good. Okay, anyone, welcome to the second class on Chapter 9. Let's go ahead and get started tonight with doing the prayers as usual. So we'll do the homage to Shakyamuni Buddha 3 times together. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. And we'll do the short mandala offering, creating some merit by making this vast pure offering to the Buddhas, to our gurus, so we can receive their blessings and inspiration and accomplish especially this perfection of wisdom that we're studying. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Great, and then let's go on to our final prayer before we do the meditation. This will be Refuge and Bodhichitta. We'll do once in English and twice in the Tibetan as we usually do. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyapsu chi daki chunyen gipe sanam gi dola penshir sangye drupar shok sangye chodang soki choknam la Jangchu Bardu Dakni Kyabsu Chi Daki Chunyen Gipe Sanam Gi Dola Penchir Sangye Dupar Shok. Okay, great. Let's do a short meditation then again before we begin the class. As usual, spending a few minutes focusing the mind using the breath in whatever way is suitable for your mind. And then after a few minutes of silent meditation, I'll come in and lead you in a short reflection to strengthen our bodhicitta motivation. So I'll ring the bell to begin the meditation. So now let's set our motivation for tonight's class. And recall from last week in the very first class, we spoke about how the root of all of our suffering is this fundamental ignorance, this mistake that we are all making in regard to the nature of ourselves, the nature of reality. And first of all, feel great joy that you've met with teachings that help us to undermine that ignorance. This will be the doorway through which you yourself can attain freedom from all the afflictions, freedom from even what obscures your deepest potential, your ability to achieve Buddhahood. But moreover, this is also knowledge that we can use to benefit others. When we look at other sentient beings and we see how they too are suffering because they're under the control of this ignorance, because through that ignorance they only create contaminated states of mind, contaminated actions, and continue to experience all the varieties of things within samsara, some good, some bad, some indifferent, but still trapped in that circle, still unenlightened as well. It should break our hearts to think that these beings are suffering so needlessly. If they too had access to this wisdom, if we could teach this to them, if we could help them to achieve these same realizations that we ourselves are striving for right now, then they too could be free. They too could attain Buddhahood. So reflect on this fact and let it bring up a very strong feeling of compassion, because every one of these beings, again, is suffering needlessly, but moreover, every one of them has been your kind mother, father, dear one to you, not just once, but many times. And so we're going to dedicate what we're doing tonight with this thought that we want to benefit them. We want to be able to help them to achieve their greatest potential. So therefore, we're going to undertake this study of this incredible chapter of Shantideva's text where he goes into great depths to explain the wisdom of emptiness. Okay, good. It's good to see you all tonight. And let's go ahead and kind of get grounded with where we were. We didn't make it too far in last week's class. In fact, we only touched on the first verse. And I did kind of caution you that these first few classes, I found it the first time I taught on this text, it took me a while just to get really into the text because there's so much preliminary information. You know, in the previous texts or the previous chapters of this text, we've gone into more of the method aspect and all the various perfections that support our development on the path in a more conventional way. Now we're getting into the ultimate nature of things, what have you. And so it's a little more technical, a little bit more challenging. So let me go ahead and get us a little bit situated in terms of where we were at in Gyaltsabje's text. So again, hopefully all of you have access to the commentary by Gyaltsabje that was translated by Venerable Fedor. And in that, again, we're just on page 1 of that. So we're going to start, even though we went into verse 1 just a little bit, we're going to start with verse 1 again tonight because there's still quite a bit more to cover. So in terms of this chapter, as most of them are structured, there's an explanation of the chapter in terms of this major outline from Gyaltsabje, and then the explanation of the title, which comes at the tail end, which is sort of a way of just putting punctuation mark on the chapter. There's 167 verses in this, and the very first section of the 3 main sections of this text is simply showing that those who wish to attain liberation need to generate the wisdom realizing suchness. And by liberation, we're including in that enlightenment. Oftentimes, again, we make that distinguishing factor between liberation, meaning self-liberation, individual liberation, versus enlightenment, which means Buddhahood. Then we're going to go on in the bulk of the text, this chapter, to talk about the method of how we generate the wisdom realizing suchness. And then the advice that Shantideva gives at the end that we should strive in achieving this realization. So verse 1, the Muni taught all these branches for the purpose of wisdom. Therefore, those who desire to pacify suffering should generate wisdom. Again, keep in mind, this is from the other file that you should have access to, which is the verses, root verses translated by Ziggy To. And so we're using her root verses and then Gyaltsep Je's commentary translated by Venerable Fedor. So there will be differences in how the verses are translated in Venerable Fedor's text. Sometimes I go through his because he has an interesting take on some of the Tibetan. Whoops. So let me take it off of that because actually I wanted to go into the text a little bit. So again, for this class, I'm not putting the text up on the screen, Gyaltsep Je's commentary. Hopefully you have that in front of you, but I will be reading all the words for each of the sections so you can follow along if you're hopefully okay with having this being read to you. So we start off this section with an argument being put forward. And we went into this a little bit in the last class. Essentially, this argument is coming forward from the tenet systems that are beneath Prasangika Madhyamaka. Last week, I went into the major divisions of the tenet systems of the Buddha. There are 4 tenet systems. The first 2 are in what we call the Hinayana tenets. The last 2 are what we call the Mahayana tenets. And the main distinguishing factor between those 2, they do have an emphasis on the Hinayana path and the Hinayana schools and on the Mahayana path and the Mahayana schools. But that's not really what distinguishes them because they all teach paths to both individual liberation and Buddhahood. It's more that in the higher schools, the Mahayana schools, they teach on selflessness of phenomena, meaning phenomena other than persons. Whereas in the lower schools, they're pretty much propounding across the board that it's just persons that we have to be looking at and realizing the correct way that persons exist. And again, they have some coarser ways of presenting that I'm not going to go into at this time. But those coarser views, Prasangika doesn't hold to any of them to be capable of allowing you to achieve liberation. Once more, if we look at that idea of our fundamental ignorance, the root of all of our suffering is the mistaken idea that things exist inherently. Well, then we have to have an antidote to that. So anything that is not an antidote to that can be helpful for us to realize, but it's not going to do the trick. And so this is coming from the point of view of those schools who are adhering to a necessity to realize a coarser view of selflessness of persons in order to be liberated, and saying that you don't need to know anything about the selflessness of phenomena. In other words, they're not even questioning how things around us exist. And of course, in the Prasangika Madhyamaka, as we'll go through in some of the detail tonight, they say that there's a mistaken idea with regard to not just the person, ourselves, and other people, but everything we are mistakenly holding to exist inherently. And everything is appearing to us as if it existed inherently, and so on. So the argument that's being put forward here on page 1 of Gyaltsep Je's commentary says, because we need to attain enlightenment to pacify all suffering in the continuum of others, we need to realize suchness. But why would one need to realize suchness to merely pacify the sufferings in one's own continuum? So all those lower schools say that if you want to be liberated from samsara yourself, you don't need to realize selflessness of phenomena. You don't need to go to the Prasangika tenets. You don't necessarily, need to do all of that. Instead, you're okay realizing something that again might be quite coarse compared to what Prasangika says. And in that way, you will achieve your own liberation. You might not be able to achieve Buddhahood, and so you don't have to investigate emptiness if you don't need to achieve Buddhahood. And so that argument is being put forward, but it's being refuted right off the bat by a quote from Nagarjuna. This is from his Precious Garland. It's actually the first 2 lines of verse 35 in Precious Garland. It says, "For as long as there is grasping at the aggregates, for that long there is grasping at the I." So the idea here is that the aggregates, most of you are familiar with that term, but essentially these are what the Buddha delineated as sort of the 5 elements that are a basis for a person. The very first one is form. We went through these when we recited the Heart Sutra at the beginning of last class. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Heart Sutra. Form is the physical component of our being. The other 4, which are feelings, discriminations, compositional factors, and consciousnesses, these are all mental in the mental sphere. So we essentially have body and mind, and the mind-body complex is the basis for a person. And again, we are all familiar with some of these teachings on emptiness, but essentially in the Prasangika view, they are the basis for a person, meaning that they are not equivalent to the person. They are the basis upon which we designate a sense of an I or a sense of someone else if it's someone else's aggregates. But essentially that basis of a person is going to be grasped at in the same way that the I that is designated to that basis is grasped at. Remember that this fundamental grasping at inherent existence is happening with regard to the I that again is merely designated or imputed to these aggregates, but it's also happening at the level of the aggregates themselves. So we are holding not just the I to inherently exist, but the body to inherently exist, and the mind to inherently exist, and our feelings to inherently exist, all of the aggregates to inherently exist, as we are with all phenomena that's outside of our personal continuum as well. So this idea of the aggregates being held as inherently existent, as long as we keep holding to that, we're going to keep holding to the I to inherently exist because it's the same concept. It's just a different basis, a different substratum, if you will, for how we are designating that as something and then adhering to it as if it had inherent existence. So I'm going to share the whole verse with you and go into a little bit of a talking about this because I think there's a bit more that we need to say about this whole idea of the conception of an I, where these two come from, how we become free of them, these two different conceptions, the self of persons and the self of phenomena. So this is another translation by Jeffrey Hopkins. As long as the aggregates are conceived, meaning it's conceived to be inherently existent, so long thereby does the conception of I exist. We also then think that the I inherently exists. They are the same conception, again, just on a different basis. Then it says further, when the conception of I exists, there is action, karma, and from it there is also birth. Of course, by that action we mean contaminated karma, contaminated with our ignorance. And from that we then take birth. Most of you are familiar with the 12 links of dependent arising, this schematic for looking at how we take rebirth on the basis of our ignorance, grasping especially at this strong sense of an I, then engaging in compositional actions that are imprinted on the consciousness and so on. I won't go into the whole 12 links tonight, but essentially this is what Nagarjuna is pointing out in this verse, is that as long as you are mistakenly grasping at the aggregates, then you're going to have the conception of I arising. We grasp at the aggregates to exist first because they generally appear first, and then we grasp at the I that is designated to that basis of the aggregates. So they're the same conception, as I keep emphasizing. It's just a different basis. So let's take a look at these two selflessnesses because our text is actually going to go into them separately as well. In chapter 9, Shantideva talks about the selflessness of persons first, and then the selflessness of phenomena other than persons, which we generally call the selflessness of phenomena. So this is from our master's program middle way study manual. Actually, when I went through the master's program, we didn't have this study manual, but nonetheless, I figured it was a good source for kind of encapsulating some of these ideas so that I would make sure I cover all the pertinent points. So it says, if one doesn't realize the mental and physical aggregates as not truly existing, one cannot realize that the person who is imputed independence on the aggregates does not truly exist, and thus one will not realize the selflessness of person. So we have to realize the selflessness of both the person and the aggregates, but as long as we are grasping at the aggregates as truly existent, inherently existent, substantially existent, again, there's a lot of these hypothetical synonyms for this, hypothetical because they don't exist actually, but these are ways that we are mistakenly conceiving of things to have a property of existence that they don't have at all. So as long as we're grasping at the aggregates, the personal aggregates, again, our own mind and body, as well as any sort of physical thing or anything in our world as inherently existent, then we're going to keep grasping at the person as well, because it's the same conception. Once more, just a different basis. So we have to realize the emptiness of both of these, the selflessness of both of these. So the next slide, just as the lack of true existence with respect to phenomena, such as the aggregates, is posited as the selflessness of phenomena, in the same way, the lack of a truly existent person is posited as the selflessness of person. So we have these two different selflessnesses that are being delineated that are very common in the Mahayana traditions. Again, the two Mahayana tenet systems, the mind only, the Chitta Matra, and then the Madhyamaka, the middle way that we're studying here. So recall that this idea of the selflessness, I talked about this a little bit last week. I'll try to be clear whenever we use the term self in a different context. Generally, when we talk selflessness, or always when we talked about selflessness, we're talking about a false view of a self that is being refuted. Therefore, things are selfless. They have selflessness. That is a fictitious self. And by self there, we don't mean the person. We mean an identity that we are giving to things, thinking that they have their own identity from their own side. We are saying that those are lacking in regard to phenomena like the aggregates, our mind and body, and phenomena, and also they are lacking in regard to the person. Now, the person is a phenomenon. It's just we're going to delineate the person as separate from other phenomena than the person. And so in the context of a person, we have the person that is merely designated to the aggregates. The aggregates are the phenomena that that person is designated towards. So we can talk about selflessness of phenomena with regard to the body, the mind, all the various elements of the body and mind. And then we can talk about selflessness of persons with regard to the I that is imputed to those. So again, why I'm pointing this out, and it makes sense as we go through all of this, especially when we get into some of the later parts where we go through the actual refutations of a self of persons versus a self of phenomena. But the idea is that there is a difference, especially with regard to how some of these lower schools are positing those. Even in the other school of the Madhyamaka tradition that I pointed out, the Svatantrika, again, I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, but I just want to point out that they say that you can actually attain liberation by realizing a coarser selflessness of persons, and that it's only to become a Buddha that you have to realize the selflessness of phenomena. So once more, that's the sort of orientation that's behind this question that's being asked in Gyaltsab Je's text. It's kind of saying, well, why do I need to realize that the selflessness, emptiness of all phenomena, when it's really just the selflessness of persons that will get me out of samsara? If all I want to attain is my own liberation. So the idea here is that we have to delineate these two. And there are also other reasons why we delineate these that will come out shortly. So without eliminating this conception, the conception of the selflessness, or the conception that is holding to a self of persons or phenomena, it is impossible to abandon what are called the afflictive obscurations. And I've got a little footnote on this that it wasn't in the middle way, or the master's program middle way study manual. These are the obscurations or obstructions that mainly block you from achieving liberation, as opposed to the knowledge obscurations, which mainly block the attainment of omniscience. And I'll delineate those two levels of obscurations later, but just know for now, we have to abandon this false sense of a self that we're adhering to, even to attain liberation, even to remove the afflictive obscurations. There is no doubt, and according to the Prasangika Madhyamaka, that this is what has to happen. So it says, then this is the reason that the conception of self of phenomena and the conception of self of persons are posited as afflictive obscurations. They are what are keeping us bound in samsara. They are the fundamental root ignorance that is the from which all of our problems are arising. Of course, it's primarily our clinging to the person that is problematic, because that's how we get into trouble with regard to so many of our actions. But we are doing the same thing with regard to our aggregates, with regard to other phenomena in the world. So this mistaken conception has to be removed for us to even attain liberation, for us to be rid of the afflictive obscurations. We'll again delineate those from the knowledge obscurations later. The two selflessnesses, once more then, are not divided by way of the object of negation. What they are, refuting, this mistaken conception adhering to inherent existence. As the object of negation for both selflessnesses is inherent existence, but rather they are being divided by way of having a different substratum. The different substratum, again, meaning they are on a different basis. Selflessness of persons with regard to the person that is imputed to the aggregates, selflessness of phenomena with regard to everything else, which includes, of course, the aggregates, because the aggregates are phenomena. Your body is a phenomenon. Your mind is a phenomenon. It is not a person. Persons are, again, what are designated to that collection, those five aggregates. Okay, so this is just something I've said before, but reiterated on the screen with that passage. So, in order to abandon the conception of a self, and by a self we mean, again, an inherently existent identity, one has to realize selflessness. And in order to realize selflessness, one has to realize the non-existence of the referent object of the conception of self, which is again the inherently existent self. Okay, so let me do a little little diagram of what's happening here. Okay, we start off with the basis for a person, which are the aggregates. We impute a sense of I on these aggregates, and that's the only way that I actually exists. And again, we'll get into all these things throughout this course, but that's the only way that I actually exist. There's nothing real on these aggregates that is the I. The I is merely designated, merely imputed. But then our ignorance grasps onto this I as if it is inherently existent. And as if it is an inherently existent I, meaning there is something that is findable, that is the I, that it is able to set itself up, that it has its own existence established by way of its own characteristics from its own side, and so on. So essentially, our ignorance has a mistaken object, something that doesn't exist at all, which is an inherently existent I that it's grasping to. Whereas all that the only way that the I exists is as merely designated, merely imputed. But we're doing the same with regard to the body as well. The body is merely imputed to this collection of stuff that includes the head and the torso and the arms and so on. But there is no real body there, but nonetheless, our ignorance is grasping as if there is an inherently existent body. So essentially, this mistaken idea of the self that we are imputing incorrectly on something that is merely designated, only nominally existent, that has to be refuted. That has to be gotten rid of in order for our ignorance to be undermined. Otherwise, we continue to have the root of our suffering because we never remove that ignorance, and we have a continued stay in samsara and a continued unenlightened existence. So essentially, this is just spelling out that we have to realize the non-existence of this inherently existent self, whether it be a self of persons or a self of phenomena. And that's what the selflessness is referring to, is the lack of that inherently existent self. Then, from the point of view of realizing the two selflessnesses, even though they arise in the opposite order, first there is the adherence to the aggregates and then the adherence to the person that is designated to the aggregates. Here, one first realizes the selflessness of persons first, and then the selflessness of phenomena. So we start off with the selflessness of persons rather than the selflessness of the aggregates or any other phenomena. And Lama Tsongkhapa says that they are realized in this order because it is easier to identify the substratum of the selflessness of persons than to identify the substratum of the selflessness of phenomena. Because we can see that we require something else to know that there's a person. We never say there's a person in the room until at least their physical aggregates are there. Hopefully their mental aggregates came along for the ride. But we have to have a basis for us to be able to know that there is a person. So there's a continued explanation of why Tsongkhapa says this. He says, why is this? When the person is realized, when you realize that there is a person in the room or what have you, it is realized to depend upon the aggregates. We can't have a person there without some basis for the person, the mind and the body complex. Understanding that the person depends on the aggregates, and we could also say, of course, that the aggregates depend upon the person, but that's another story. But understanding here that the person depends on the aggregates, one understands that the person does not exist independent from the aggregates, and that the person is therefore merely imputed by conception. Of course, this is getting to already some of the reasoning that is so essential to understanding emptiness, is to recognize that there is a dependent arising at the very subtle level of things depending upon mere imputation, mere designation, which I've already referred to a couple of times tonight. So again, because we have the understanding that for a person to appear, to be realized is, oh, there's Dawn on the screen now. Well, it's not really Dawn, it's pixels that are being generated through all of this network and what have you. But if I was in the room with you, you would have an understanding that in order for Dawn to be there, there has to be a body and a mind appearing there before you. Those together then become the basis for a designation of Dawn. Without those in the room, Dawn can't be in the room. So there's a dependence upon the aggregates in order for the person to appear. So we already have some idea of that to some degree. So we don't necessarily, with regard to a person, it's a little bit easier to work with. It's still getting at a pretty fine, subtle object of negation in terms of what is inherent existence. But nonetheless, this is, something that, again, that's why the other schools teach a coarser view of even a self of persons that is being refuted, is because there are other ways that we're mistakenly looking at the self, the person. But the person is definitely realized to depend upon the aggregates in order for that person to appear. There has to be some sort of basis that we go, oh, there's Don's body, therefore there's Don. And so in that way, you can realize the selflessness of persons a little bit easier than regard to the selflessness of phenomena. And of course, it's the main problem, as I said. That's why we create actions, is because we think we're real in this fictitious way. And therefore, we need to get what that self wants. We need to avoid what that self doesn't want. And we end up having attachment, anger, all the other delusions on the basis of that. So this is, again, just pointing out why we would realize the selflessness of persons first. And Shantideva is going to go into refuting the self of persons initially, and then going on to refute the self of phenomena. So after one has realized the selflessness of persons, one does not have to apply further reasonings in order to realize the selflessness of phenomena. Merely by focusing on an object, such as having first analyzed the self that is the person that we are adhering to wrongly, and then to look at the aggregates that are the basis for that person and see how we are also grasping at a self in regard to them. But merely by focusing on those aggregates, for example, and applying the same reasoning, the emptiness of that object will be realized. Why? Because we're realizing the same emptiness, the lack of inherent existence, it's just a different substratum, a different basis. Again, this is the Prasangika point of view. In the other schools, they would say that is a huge difference with regard to these. So there is a wonderful verse from Chandrakirti's text, which was what we studied in the master's program. That's what those notes are from the middle way studies that were the second course in the master's program. This is studied in the monasteries as the way of revealing the middle way view that we are studying in this text as part of Shantideva's chapter 9. Having seen with intelligence that afflictions and faults, without exception, arise from the view of the transitory collection, and having realized that the self is the object of that, yogis refute the self. So I'm introducing some more terminology here, and that's because this terminology is going to come up when we return to the commentary from Gyaltsabje. The new terminology especially is the second line, the view of the transitory collection. So this is another way of talking about the form of ignorance, this false view that is adhering to an inherently existent I. It's a subset of the selflessness of persons, because selflessness, or self of persons, sorry, it's a subset of the self of persons that are being grasped at, because we grasp at other people as well in a fictitious way. But this is the I that is in your own continuum, the person that you adhere to as being real. The view of the transitory collection is your own personal ignorance adhering to yourself to inherently exist. It's a subset of ignorance because it's a very important one. Again, it is what's causing most of our problems. So the last two lines, having realized that that false view of a self that this view is adhering to is the object of that view, yogis then refute that self. They have to, get rid of that false conception, just like we saw earlier. We have to get rid of that conceived object. So let's just talk a little bit more about this view of the transitory collection. And again, it's going to come up in our text, so I have to introduce you to all of this terminology tonight. According to the Prasangika school, again, it will be defined differently by some of the other tenet systems. The definition of a view of the transitory collection is an afflicted wisdom. It's interesting, they call these afflicted wisdom, but remember last week I talked about how wisdom isn't necessarily virtuous. It's actually a unspecified mental factor. It's one of the object determining mental factors, and it can be either afflicted or unafflicted depending upon what is accompanying it. This is an afflicted wisdom. It actually has a false way of looking at things. It has a way of determining things. It's kind of a determinative knower, but it's not determining things in a correct way. It's observing, as it says here, either the I or the mine. And by mine, we don't mean those possessions that are owned. We mean the person who is the owner. I always think it should be my rather than mine, either the I or the my, the sense of the owner of things, or just the sense of I that is here with us all the time. And it's observing those in one's own continuum and conceiving it to exist inherently. So again, as I said, this is kind of the tightest way that we can look at our ignorance being operative in our lives, is that we all are observing this transitory collection of things, this mind body. We are imputing an I on the basis of it, and then we are adhering to that I as if it existed inherently, intrinsically. That's what this view of the transitory collection is doing. It also has the flavor of my or mine whenever we are thinking of something that we are the possessor of, whether it be the possessor of our body, like to think, oh, my head, my ear, my eye, or whether it be, the possessor of other things outside of our continuum, my car, my books, my whatever that I might have attachment to, or, just have a reference to. But it's a false sense of an I that is inherently existent that this is really the root of all of our suffering, the main form of ignorance that is driving the whole show. Because on the basis of what is just a collection of stuff that we're thinking of as I, we believe that there's so much more. We adhere to it as if it's real, as if it exists from its own side. So according to Prasangika Madhyamaka, oh wait, this is where I stop because I want to come into that later. All right, so again, what we've talked about so far is just this idea that when we're talking about in this section where there's this argument being put forward, that there are schools that adhere to there being a difference between realizing the selflessness of persons, helping you to attain just liberation, and realizing the selflessness of phenomena to achieve Buddhahood. So we did a bit of delineating what those two are, but recognizing that from the Prasangika point of view, they're actually the same conception, just in regard to persons and in regard to phenomena other than persons. So we have this necessity, according to Prasangika, to realize that everything that exists doesn't exist from its own side. But once more, we start with the selflessness of persons. Why? Because it's easier to realize, but we also have to break the chain that is causing us to get into trouble in the first place, which is that strong adherence to this I or mine or my that we think is real. That's the view of the transitory collection. So again, we have ignorance present in a variety of ways, but the most direct way that we are causing our own problems is by clinging to this transitory stuff that we are thinking of as I, as if there's a real I there, that real I that isn't existing at all, that is held to be truly existent, inherently existent, and so on. So with that all in mind, now we finally can get back to the commentary, still on page 1. And so there's a little bit from Gyaltsab on that verse from Nagarjuna that I quoted. Nagarjuna is saying that for as long as there is true grasping at the aggregates, for that long, one will not stop the transitory view, grasping at inherent I and mine. So as long as we're with any form of ignorance, whether it be grasping at the body, grasping at the trees, the flowers, whatever, or grasping at the I, we're not going to be free from samsara, free from any of our suffering, until we get rid of that conception that is an overlay that we're putting on everything that exists, but especially at the I and mine. So unlike what the lower schools say, you do have to realize this emptiness or suchness, this lack of inherent existence with regard to all phenomena in order to be liberated, and certainly then in order to attain enlightenment. So he continues, he says, nobody here, of course, meaning, Prasangika, nobody here asserts that the hearer and what he calls here the self-liberator, we usually call those solitary realizers. It's the hearers are the Shravakas, those who are the hearers of the Mahayana Dharma. They don't necessarily practice it, but they cause others to hear and their proclamations of what they have realized on their path. They're Hinayana practitioners, those on the fundamental vehicle who achieve their own liberation. Then what he's calling here self-liberators, these are the solitary realizers. They're another branch of the Hinayana practitioners who are called that because in their very last lifetime, before they attain their liberation, they actually make prayers to be born in a place where there are no other teachers, Buddhas, and they can achieve their liberation and then proclaim the Dharma through various miraculous deeds and what have you. And so anyway, there are two different types of practitioners on the Hinayana Mahayana path. On the Mahayana path, there's only one, the Bodhisattva. So often we talk about these being the three vehicles: the hearers, the solitary realizers, or what he's calling, Venerable Fetter's calling self-liberators, and then the Bodhisattvas. Again, those are the three different types of Buddhist practitioners. And the Buddha taught a full path for them to follow in terms of the hearers and the solitary realizers attain their own liberation, whereas the Bodhisattvas attain full enlightenment. Now, again, those who attain their own liberation aren't done with their work. They have to enter into the Mahayana at some later stage, because everyone in this presentation of the path, everyone has to eventually attain Buddhahood. That is the final goal, the one goal that we all will accomplish eventually. So again, those are the practitioners of the Hinayana that, as I said earlier, the lower schools will say that you can attain your own liberation as a hearer or a solitary realizer without realizing this deeper form of selflessness or emptiness. So again, to start again, he says, nobody here asserts that hearer and self-liberator arhats have not completely abandoned the transitory view. And even the lower schools would say this, right? They have to abandon the transitory view, the view of the transitory collection, in order to attain liberation. Even to attain their own liberation, that is necessary, because otherwise they're going to keep clinging to some form of a self and keep cycling in samsara. But because one needs to stop true grasping at the aggregates to that end, not just at the person, the I, it is asserted that they realize the non-true existence of the aggregates. So from Prasangika's point of view, if they have attained an arhat state, in other words, they have fully removed all the afflictive obscurations, then they must have realized the lack of true existence of the aggregates as well as the person. Because according once more to Prasangika Madhyamaka, you have to realize the emptiness of everything, the selflessness of everything. Not just the selflessness of persons in some coarser way, but you have to realize the selflessness of all phenomena other than persons, because it's once more the same misconception with regard to all of them. And as we saw in that little explanation, you don't have to do additional realizing or analysis necessarily to realize that. You just apply the same understanding. Just as I lack inherent existence, so does my body lack inherent existence, so do computers lack inherent existence, and so on. So what is being said there is, from Prasangika's point of view, everyone who is a fully qualified arhat, who has attained that state, has realized both the selflessness of persons and the selflessness of phenomena, and has realized definitely this subtlest view, the lack of a truly existent or inherently existent self with regard to persons and phenomena other than persons. So he goes on then to say in the next paragraph, this master, Shantideva, asserts as well that one needs to realize suchness or emptiness in order to pacify the sufferings of psychic existence, which is explained further below. So again, he's saying the same thing, that in order to just attain liberation, which is the pacification of all your suffering, you need to realize suchness, emptiness. Those who wish to understand this presentation more extensively should do so in dependence on the great commentary by the great divine omniscient Lama Tsongkhapa, who is the guide of all the worlds, on the introduction to the middle way. His text called Illuminating the Intent, or Illuminating the Thought. There actually is a brand new translation by Thupten Jinpa of that text. This is the text we use to study Chandrakirti's text. It's a commentary by Tsongkhapa on that wonderful text. So then going on to the next paragraph, the clear cognizance of the various commentaries on this text would show it to teach that hearers and solitary realizers or self-liberators do not realize the selflessness of phenomena as a mistaken meaning of the text shall be explained. So those who do hold that, again, they don't need to realize this subtler view of selflessness and selflessness with regard to all phenomena, that's mistaken. That's not a correct view according to Prasangika. And actually, again, Tsongkhapa in his commentary goes to great lengths to show that everyone who achieves liberation has to realize emptiness as it is taught in the Prasangika Madhyamaka, meaning in regard to all phenomena, and especially this subtlest view of emptiness, the lack of true existence or inherent existence. So then it goes into a little more commentary on the verse. Again, in the verse, we have these branches, meaning kind of the Buddha taught all of these various branches that proceeded in order to achieve wisdom. This is the goal. So it says here, these branches, this is the bottom of page 1, can refer merely to calm abiding, which is explained in the 8th chapter, which is the portion of the text we just concluded. All right, we studied that chapter on concentration, meditative stabilization. Or it can refer to all the remaining perfections, starting with generosity. Again, in the Bodhisattva path, we have the 6 perfections. We've already looked at the 5 to some degree. Generosity isn't taught explicitly in any of the chapters of Shantideva's text, but it will come up in the dedication chapter, chapter 10. Then we had in chapter 5, morality, in 6, patience, in 7, effort, in chapter 8, concentration. So all of these 5 perfections that precede the 6th perfection, the perfection of wisdom, could be what's being referred to here as these branches. And he says, these are the 2 systems, or there are these 2 systems, that it either branches refers to just concentration, which was the immediate chapter, or it could include all 5 perfections. And it says here, and although the first system is feasible from the point of view of the relation of the earlier and later chapters, it is feasible to think that it's just concentration. Here, one follows the second system. So we actually want to think that this is including the entirety of all the Bodhisattva's practices, that the Buddha taught all the Bodhisattva practices. Why? So we can achieve wisdom. Remember how we looked last week at how all the other 5 perfections, without the eyes of wisdom, they're blind. They cannot actually get you to the destination. You need to have wisdom. Without wisdom, it's impossible to remove these obscurations. Wisdom plays a more functional role in that regard, but you, of course, need the other side of it as well. This is this dual track that we have on the path that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. So then there's a few other points, and I'm going to try to go through these fairly quickly because they're not really that important, but beginning at top of page 2. The doubts with regard to the branches of generosity and so forth were taught for the purpose of wisdom are eliminated as follows. In general, do generosity and the other perfections not need to precede the realization of suchness by way of listening and contemplation? Because although one needs to build up merit to realize emptiness, the practices of a bodhisattva, such as explained here, do not have to be preliminaries. That's because essentially people can realize emptiness to some degree, and most bodhisattvas who are sharp faculty, do have some understanding of emptiness even before generating uncontrived bodhicitta, before becoming a bodhisattva. So they will investigate it, and it's not necessary to have done all these other preliminary bodhisattva practices, the other 5 perfections, before one can realize emptiness to some degree. Not realize directly, but certainly realize, with some conceptual understanding of what emptiness is about. So this is one point. For those bodhisattvas who are intent upon achieving enlightenment, they still can do that, acquire some wisdom of emptiness without having participated in those preliminaries. This is similar to the 2 modes of realizing suchness through listening and contemplating, as explained by the Master Kamala Shila. Remember, there are 3 sort of wisdoms. One is the wisdom we acquire through listening, through hearing teachings, reading teachings. That's bringing in the raw data that we already gained some wisdom from. The second one is the wisdom from contemplation, from thinking about the teachings, reflecting on them. The third is more of a realization that occurs through the union of calm abiding and special insight through deep meditation. It's the wisdom arisen from meditation. Again, we've touched on these, I think, before. So again, emptiness can be realized prior to the path by those sharp facultied bodhisattvas. So it's not to say that you have to have practiced the 5 perfections as preliminaries before you can achieve the perfection of wisdom. And remember, I did talk about how they are built one upon the other to a large degree, but nonetheless, it doesn't mean that they absolutely can't stand on their own. And in this case, for the perfection of wisdom, it definitely can. A second point that's being raised in the next paragraph: one also does not need them as preliminaries to generate a mind-moving experience of emptiness, because then they would also have to precede other realizations, such as an experience of impermanence. So again, a mind-moving experience of emptiness, I'm assuming, means, a deeper realization that would come about through some form of meditation, still be conceptual, but not just, from listening or contemplating. Third, one also does not need them as preliminaries for the generation of the superior insight, realizing emptiness from meditation, that direct realization of emptiness even. So not only for a deeper investigation that gets you to a conceptual understanding of emptiness, but even a direct realization of emptiness doesn't require someone to have practiced the 5 preliminaries of the 5 other perfections. Why? Because although they do not first engage in the practices of a bodhisattva, Gyaltsab says, hearers and self-liberators, solitary realizers, realize suchness in the way just mentioned. So again, we just talked about how those who are on the Hinayana path, those two practitioners, the hearers and the solitary realizers, they realize emptiness without practicing the perfections at all. They don't have bodhicitta in their minds. They're not on the Mahayana path, and they achieve a direct realization of emptiness on their path of seeing, where they actually have their initial direct realization of emptiness, and they begin removing those afflictive obscurations that keep them from being liberated and attain arhatship on the basis of that. So he's just pointing out that, again, we can't say that it's absolute, that these branches means that everyone has to engage in all 5 perfections before they can actualize anything that is similar to the perfection of wisdom. Now, again, a hearer or a solitary realizer doesn't have a perfection of wisdom because they're not a bodhisattva. Perfection of wisdom, as we saw in last week's slides, it's only designated as such because it's in the mind of someone who has bodhicitta, it's being practiced by a bodhisattva. But they would still have the wisdom realizing emptiness directly, absolutely, because that was what was just pointed out in the previous page. They have to have that wisdom realizing emptiness to attain their goal of self-liberation, attaining a state of an arhat, the peace of solitary nirvana. So now another argument is being put forward. They've got a lot in these beginning pages, again, of just a lot of commentary that's not only about one verse so far. The argument is put forward that they were taught for the purpose of wisdom is because the wisdom realizing emptiness is the substantial cause for the Dharmakaya, and the methods of generosity and the other perfections are the simultaneously acting conditions. One needs the benefit of generosity and the other perfections to achieve the result of wisdom. I mean, this is true, that what this objector is saying, there's some substance to it. You do have to kind of have both of those components, the 2 wings of the bird, the method and the wisdom, in order to achieve the goal of enlightenment. But the answer that's given in this case by Shantideva or Gyaltsab says, in that case, one could also turn it around and say that wisdom was taught for the purpose of the other perfections. So, I mean, even though they do have some role they play with regard to each other, we still have to say that the wisdom is supreme, that it is only for the purpose of achieving wisdom that the other perfections were taught, because they are both components in developing enlightenment. But as was pointed out, you can practice the other 5 perfections till the cows come home. If you never generate the perfection of wisdom, you're never going to achieve enlightenment. Certainly never going to achieve even liberation, because the perfection of wisdom and some realization of emptiness at a direct level is essential to achieve any of these higher goals. Okay, so on to about the middle of page 2. Without the wisdom realizing emptiness, one cannot exhaust the seeds of the 2 obscurations. And although one does not need to be adorned with infinite merit to eliminate merely the seeds of the afflictive obscurations, one does need infinite merit to eliminate the seeds of the obscurations to knowledge. So I'm going to go into, in a moment, the slides that delineate these 2. We've already touched on afflictive obscurations to some degree, and I briefly said what the knowledge obscurations were. They are what block you from becoming a Buddha, from having an omniscient mind. But we'll take a look in a moment at what those are in more detail. So then it says, as this text, meaning the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, our text we're studying, is mainly from the point of view of eliminating the obscurations to knowledge, to omniscience, to Buddhahood, it says these branches are taught for the purpose of wisdom. It's because, again, this is being presented to a Mahayana audience. It is like we are talking about why we need to generate this perfection of wisdom, this final perfection, and that the other 5 perfections are what they were all taught for the purpose of doing this, to support that, to be able to achieve enlightenment on the basis of bringing these 2 together. Because it's through the perfection of wisdom that, as was pointed out, you'll be able to remove the afflictive obscurations and then be able to remove the knowledge obscurations. Even for the Bodhisattva, they do have to remove the afflictive obscurations without a doubt, but their goal is to remove the knowledge obscurations. Why? Because that's what blocks them from becoming a Buddha. All right, so let's take a look at what these are, so we have a little bit better understanding of what is meant by these two obscurations. According to the Prasangika Madhyamikas, the conception of true existence, inherent existence, again, you can substitute anytime you see true existence, inherent existence, substantial existence, existence from its own side, what have you. The conception of that is an afflictive obscuration and needs to be abandoned by all three lineage bearers, all three vehicles, hearers, solitary realizers, and bodhisattvas, in order for them to achieve their respective enlightenment. This means that all hearer and solitary realizer foe destroyers necessarily realize the selflessness of phenomena, which is the lack of true existence. Again, this is repeating what we already talked about earlier, but it's just tying it into this presentation of the two obscurations. Then, the main object of meditation for hearers and solitary realizers is the lack of a truly existent person, though. They also realize the lack of truly existent phenomena, although in a less extensive way and with less reasonings than bodhisattvas. By familiarizing with the direct realization of this, they attain liberation from samsara. So without a doubt, for you to attain a complete freedom from the afflictive obscurations, you need to realize emptiness, the selflessness of persons initially, and then you will have an understanding of the selflessness of phenomena and a knowledge of that. But as was said here, you don't go through the more extensive techniques, reasonings that help you to develop that wisdom. Secondly, the knowledge obscurations, or what we call sometimes obscurations to omniscience. These are the mistaken dualistic appearances, such as the appearance of true existence that is happening for all of us all the time, other than if you're in meditative equipoise on emptiness and you're a Buddha. And once you become a Buddha, of course, you're free of those. But these also include, as my footnote says, the imprints from the conception of true existence that are giving rise to those mistaken appearances. And those are the main object of abandonment for the Bodhisattva. Because once more, this is what blocks you from having omniscience, what blocks you from being able to know the two truths at one time, to know all phenomena at one time. So let's talk a little bit about these knowledge obscurations, because I just want to make sure we're clear about what's going on. I think I talked a little bit last week again, and I even talked about it tonight with regard to the person. And let's use the person as an example. Once more, you have a basis that appears that is the basis of designation for a person. In the case of people, human beings, you have a human body and a human mind together with that, and that is what is being designated as I in regard to ourselves, or as Joe, Bobby, whoever, all these various people that we might designate. That sense of an I, again, is being held to as inherently existent. That's an afflictive obscuration. But through the force of us having this conception that is adhering to inherent existence since beginningless time, we have created a very subtle imprint on the mind, what are called these bakchaks. These imprints on the mind give rise to a mistaken appearance. So that mistaken appearance is together with, once more, everything that appears to us in our conceptual mind, in our field of awareness in the external world, what have you. Everything that appears is together with a false appearance, as if it existed from its own side, as if it had its own mode of existence. So if I hold up, I did this in a recent class that seemed to work okay. I hold up my little wrist mala that I have here. Of course, there was the basis that appeared for you first, right? And then, maybe I think you're all familiar with what a wrist mala is. So I said, my wrist mala. So you have this conception of it. We are grasping at it as if it existed from its own side, from the side of this basis, that there's a truly existent wrist mala in my hand, but it's also appearing that way. Every time something appears to us, it appears to have its own identity that is established from its own side on its own. And of course, we're agreeing to that. The way Lama Zopa talks about it is there's the basis that gets designated. The first time we came into contact with something that looked like this, it had the 21 beads and the guru bead and what have you in the string. And we heard it was a wrist mala. Oh, that makes sense. You put it on your wrist, it's nice. You can carry your mala around and not lose it or whatever. So we have this designation as soon as a designation is made, it's like wrist-mala absorbs into this basis and comes back, projects back at us as if it's established out here. It seems to have its own identity as that, not in any way dependent upon me designating it as wrist-mala. But wrist-mala is only designated. In fact, I don't have a real wrist-mala in my hand at all. What's in my hand is the basis for wrist-mala. Wrist-mala is simply a conception that I designate to this collection of stuff. So again, there's this false appearance that is happening. When we begin our process of realizing emptiness, we initially remove that false conception, that grasping to it as if it's true. That's the afflictive obscurations. But even once you remove all that, even if you become an arhat, these amazing beings who have accomplished complete liberation from samsara, everything still appears as if it exists from its own side. It still seems to have its own entity, its own established by way of its own characteristics, all these ways, again, that we talk about this false view. Rinpoche simply calls it appears real. It has an appearance of reality, because this is infusing our view of reality, that everything exists from its own side. So those are the knowledge obscurations, this false appearance as if things exist from their own side, as if there's a real wrist-mala out here established from the side of this basis, and the imprints that give rise to that. Again, it's all happening within our own mind. It's not like there's something out here that's happening. This out here is appearing to us through the force of these imprints as if it was inherently established, as if it did exist from its own side. So once more, the first step is to stop believing in that. That'll get rid of the afflictive obscurations once we fine-tune that understanding through direct realizations continually and remove all of the afflictive obscurations. But then we're still going to have the false appearance that needs to be removed through continued realization of emptiness together with a continued development of merit that will eventually allow you to cut through that. And when you cut through that, then you become a Buddha. And of course, in the state of Buddhahood, you can know all phenomena in a single instant. You don't even have to turn the mind towards any particular phenomena. You have complete omniscient awareness, because all those subtle obstacles that are keeping you from accomplishing that have been removed. And the subtlest obstacle, again, is the knowledge obscurations, this imprint that we have in our minds that causes things to appear to exist from their own side, appear to have their own substantial identity. So this is what we mean by these two. And this is why in our text, again, what was being said here was that without realizing emptiness, you can't get rid of the afflictive obscurations, but you also, of course, can't get rid of the knowledge obscurations. We have to realize emptiness for both of them. And so those who want to achieve their own liberation and remove the afflictive obscurations, they have to realize this. For those who are bodhisattvas who are intent upon achieving Buddhahood, the omniscient mind, well, then they too have to do that, because both levels of obscurations require this level of wisdom. So that's, again, as it says there, as this text is mainly from the point of view of eliminating the obscurations to knowledge, that's why Gyaltsab Je says specifically, it says these branches are taught for the purpose of wisdom, because for the bodhisattva, they need to accompany that wisdom realizing emptiness once more with the practice of the other 5 perfections, with the method aspect of the path, so that they can then have both wings of the bird and can attain enlightenment. So then it goes on page 2, Gyaltsab Je says, it is Master Nagarjuna's position that true grasping, self-grasping, is an afflictive obscuration, and this master asserts the same. So again, Nagarjuna, Shantideva, they're all within the same lineage of teachings that teach this being the subtlest view that we can realize the lack of inherent existence of persons and phenomena. And so again, everything's all consistent. Gyaltsab Je is kind of, dotting his I's and crossing his T's here. Then from the sutra, perfectly condensing Dharma, if one places the mind in equipoise, one knows the absolute the way it is. So this is again showing how, once more, we touched on this a little bit last week, how even though he was saying, yes, all 5 perfections are needed, it is the 5th perfection in particular that has to be united with this special insight. Remember last week I emphasized how without a basis of calm abiding, you cannot develop special insight. You need to have a mind that is able to abide on a single object as long as one wishes, without any sort of distraction occurring, as well as to have this pliancy, this suppleness of body and mind present that will allow you to achieve these realizations, and especially the realization that is the sixth perfection, the perfection of wisdom, that special insight that will cause you to then proceed on the path. Then from the compendium of trainings, it says in equipoise, one knows the absolute the way it is. So this idea of equipoise, it's mentioned in both of these. This is referring to what we often call meditative equipoise, which is when one is absorbed into a direct realization of emptiness. This is how the Bodhisattva proceeds on the path. Here I'm going to show really quickly, and I'll be happy to send this so that it can be out on the website, Shantideva Center's website, for you to be able to access. This is the chart we put together. I didn't put it together. Someone in the master's program who had better word skills than me put together this whole chart that shows how the Bodhisattva proceeds on the Mahayana path according to Prasangika Madhyamaka. Now, I taught on grounds and paths recently that go through an explanation of all of this, and there is actually some modification to this based on that text, but it's essentially what's going on is that everything that's from the left to the right, the far left, that first section where it says ordinary bodhisattva, right under first great countless eon, this whole section, one's an ordinary bodhisattva because if you're newly entering into the Mahayana, you haven't yet realized emptiness. When you get up to this delineation right there where it's at the beginning of the path of seeing, where you see this herringbone design. This herringbone is what's called a meditative equipoise. This is the initial direct realization of emptiness that occurs for the Bodhisattva who newly enters the Mahayana path, not someone who already finished the Hinayana path and is coming in, because they've already done the work to remove the afflictive obscurations. This is somebody who begins the process of removing the afflictive obscurations on the path of seeing, right where this circle 7 is at the bottom of the screen there. You'll see a circle around the number 7. That begins the first ground or bhumi of the 10 bhumis. One from the path of seeing, which is within the first ground, continuing on into the path of meditation, all the way through the 7th ground, where there's this new designation that is the second great countless eon coming to an end. That is where one abandons the afflictive obscurations through these meditative equipoise sessions, where one directly realizes emptiness and removes subtler and subtler layers of these afflictive obscurations. Then one begins the process of removing the knowledge obscurations and then the obscurations to omniscience. And those happen on the 8th, 9th, and 10th grounds until one enters into Buddhahood, becomes a Buddha on the path of no more learning. So many of you have studied these paths before. We have essentially 5 paths: the path of accumulation, path of preparation, where one's an ordinary being, the path of seeing, path of meditation, where one is a bodhisattva superior, and then one becomes a Buddha on the 5th path, the path of no more learning. So again, those first great countless eon, second and third at the top there, just so you know, that's the kind of the merit side of it, that we need to accompany our wisdom with a collection of merit, the method side of the path, that second wing that is so essential as well. But once more, without the wisdom realizing emptiness, you can accumulate merit, as I said, till the cows come home, but you're never going to get to Buddhahood without the wisdom realizing emptiness. So what's being pointed out here are these herringbone things. The meditative equipoise, just so you know, is divided into 2 parts. Let me scroll the screen a little bit. You'll see that there's the downward one that starts from the upper left and goes downward to the right. That is what's called the uninterrupted path. That is the initial antidote to some level of the obscurations. Again, from the 1st through the 7th ground, it's an antidote to the afflictive obscurations. And then from the 8th through the 10th grounds, it's an antidote to the knowledge obscurations. That's the initial antidote being generated when one is directly realizing emptiness. But then there is a path of release, which is the other side of the herringbone, where that level of obscuration has been completely removed and it will never return again. You have at that point what's called a true cessation. All right, so again, I could talk about this chart all night, but I'll put it out there and I'll probably come back to it on occasion. But that is to give you an idea of what's being talked about in this section where it says, you need to place your mind in equipoise, a meditative, stable mind that is directly realizing emptiness in order for that absolute to be realized. Then it says, knowing as it is refers to superior insight, and therefore the perfection of meditative stabilization explained in the 8th chapter is a causal branch of the wisdom explained here. A long way around just to say, yes, you absolutely need meditation without a doubt. So if we review, he said that that whole idea of these branches, we could say it just refers to concentration, or we could say it refers to all 5 perfections of the Bodhisattva. We would choose that one as the best interpretation, but then he comes back around to say, but nonetheless, we still have to emphasize that concentration is absolutely essential. If you don't attain the calm abiding, you could never unite that calm abiding with special insight and achieve these direct realizations of emptiness that will allow you to remove the obscurations. And again, both levels of obscurations, those that obstruct our liberation, which are the afflictive obscurations, those that obstruct Buddhahood, which are the knowledge obscurations, both of them require a wisdom realizing selflessness, emptiness, in order to be accomplished. Now we get to everything I said summarized in like 2 sentences on the next page, page 3, the auxiliary meaning. As one wishes to pacify the sufferings of psychic existence of self and others, one needs to generate the wisdom realizing selflessness. Okay. The earlier explained branches of generosity and the other perfections, this collection of causes was taught by the Buddha for the purpose of generating the wisdom realizing emptiness. That's essentially what that verse was saying, but we obviously had a long way around to get to it because we have to explain all this various terminology that Gyaltsab Je is talking about. All right, so we will have a time for questions, but let me see if I can go just a little bit further in terms of a few more slides, because otherwise we're going to be on this beginning section forever. Okay, now we go into the larger outline. This is the largest outline of the entire text, the method of how to generate the wisdom realizing suchness. This in turn is divided into 3 parts. One is going to start with the presentation of the 2 truths. This is our next like 38 verses. Then establishing that even just to attain liberation, one needs to realize emptiness, even though we've already talked about that from Gyaltsab Je's commentary. It's going to be reiterated there. And then explaining extensively the reasoning establishing emptiness, which once more will start with the reasoning of refuting a self of persons, realizing selflessness of persons, and refuting a self of phenomena, realizing that selflessness. So before we go into this, I do want to give a little background on the 2 truths. This is a wonderful way that Shantideva starts his text, and actually His Holiness likes to start a lot of his presentations of middle way philosophy by talking about the 2 truths, because they're kind of the ground, the basis upon which the entire structure of the Buddhist path is built. And of course, the resultant state, the fruit of the Buddhist path as well. So this is from the Dalai Lama, from the book that I hope you're all reading as part of this course. This is the one I'm really, again, asking you to read, Practicing Wisdom, page 25. Without understanding the nature of these 2 truths, what are frequently called the conventional and the ultimate, though Venerable Fedor has an argument for why he would prefer a different name for the first one, it is difficult to fully appreciate the distinction between appearance and reality. That is just the discrepancy we experience between our perception and the way things actually are. As I was pointing out with my mala, that things appear to inherently exist. That is what their appearance is, but it is totally contradictory to their actual reality. Things do not have that, not even an atom of inherent existence. Without a deep understanding of this fact, the Dalai Lama says, we won't be in a position to get at the root of our fundamental ignorance. And of course, won't be in a position to even benefit others by realizing the difference between these 2 truths, what the true truths are really speaking to. So, 1, it is necessary for a bodhisattva to fully comprehend the 2 truths, conventional and ultimate, which constitute the basis of the path. As I was just saying, this is the ground upon which the entire Buddhist presentation is built, that there are 2 divisions of phenomena. And on the basis of everything that exists, it is either a conventional truth, or what Venerable Fedor calls an illusory truth, or an ultimate truth. This is the basis of the path, is that there is this division into those phenomena which are one and those which are the other. They are a dichotomy, meaning that everything that exists is one or the other. There's nothing that is both. If it exists, it is either conventional or it is ultimate. 2, the path is the practice of method combined with the development of wisdom. On the basis of the conventional, which includes, karma and our acts of generosity and all the things that we've already touched on in regard to the Bodhisattva path, those are the practice of method. Then, combined with the development of wisdom, that is based on ultimate truth. That is the foundation for our development of wisdom, is to understand the ultimate truth about all phenomena, their emptiness, their lack of inherent existence. The final result, or the fruit, is the two bodies of a Buddha. The two bodies of the Buddha being the form bodies that arise from our method side, from the accumulation of merit and so on, and then our truth body that arises from the wisdom aspect, that is the culmination of the development of our wisdom realizing emptiness. All Mahayana texts give instructions on these 3 points. This is, again, maybe something you've run across before, this whole idea of the basis, the path, and the fruit. Here's a little chart for you just to put them all together. That'll be in the slides then. Again, on a more conventional level, the basis is conventional truth, all those things that fit into that category. And the method aspect is what we focus on, collecting merit and so on the path. And that culminates in what's called a form body of a Buddha, the Rupakaya. Again, the Rupakaya are the various ways that a Buddha manifests for the benefit of other beings. So again, conventional bodhicitta is mainly informing that left side. The strong intention to benefit others on the basis of the practices we engage in, the accumulation of merit, all the things we need to do that allow us to be of benefit to others in the final form of a final body of a Buddha, which is the form body, the ability to manifest in form to benefit other beings. On the ultimate level, the basis is ultimate truth, the emptiness of all phenomena, their lack of inherent existence. The wisdom aspect, the collection of wisdom, is what we practice on the path in order to bring that to the fruition of the truth body, the Dharmakaya, the wisdom mind of a Buddha that is fully developed, that is omniscient, that is then the source from which all of the form bodies appear, if you will, because that truth body knows the minds of all beings and knows exactly how to appear to benefit other beings. But these are kind of, again, part and parcel of each other. They're practiced sort of separately and understood separately conceptually, but they are really part and parcel of the whole thing, because everything that exists, as we're going to see when we start looking at conventional truth and ultimate truth, everything that exists together with its emptiness. And the method aspect is practiced within the understanding of emptiness. And emptiness, of course, we depend upon other phenomena in order for that emptiness to manifest. So conventional and ultimate are sort of inextricably bound up with each other. And in the resultant state of a Buddha, even though they can isolate these two aspects of it, they are always united, always together. Always a physical manifestation that is occurring on the basis of the mental evolution to the state of Buddhahood that has occurred. So that may be about all I have time for. One thing I might ask you to take a look at, because I do have a few slides I want to share, but if you haven't read this little introduction that happens, it's called Translator's Introduction, and there aren't any page numbers for it. It preceded our page 1. You might take a look at the first few pages of that. And that's because you don't necessarily have to go into the whole thing on syllogisms, but where it says illusory truth, I'm going to talk about that a little bit next week, because I actually do like what Venerable Fedor, his rationale for calling these illusory truth. But there's a lot of different names that people give to that category of the two truths, because they're really not truths. There's an illusory quality to them. They appear to be true, but they aren't. And they might call them conventional truths, which is, again, the common name that we give to them. But actually more accurate would be illusory or deceptive truths, obscurational truths. Alex Berzin calls them surface truths, relative truths, veiled truths, concealed truths, truth for a concealer. I mean, there's a lot of different terminology for it, but all of this is getting at the fact that when we talk about conventional truth, it's those things like malas and people and whatever that are appearing to us as if they existed in a way that is not how they exist at all. So they're not really true because they are together with some falsity. They appear to exist one way but don't exist that way at all. Whereas ultimate truth, emptiness, without a doubt, the way it exists and the way it appears when we are in meditative equipoise on it, as I was talking about earlier, are totally in alignment. There is no contradiction between how it appears and how it exists in reality. So that is really what we mean by truth. What we call an illusory truth is only truth within the perspective of a mind that has ignorance. And this is, of course, what we're going to go into in a little bit more detail as we get into the section that deals with the two truths, which again will carry forward from verse 2 on and get into that in more detail. All right, so let me see if there are any questions in the chat box. I haven't checked the chat box at all yet tonight. No, mostly just some references, links to various things. So anyone have any questions? Let me take it off of the spotlight and open it up so I can see people. Okay. Anyone, any questions tonight on what I've talked about? Sneh, sorry, I didn't see the hand raised. Yes.
Don, I had a question about the knowledge obscurations.
Sure.
When you were showing us that chart, so you become an 8th stage Bodhisattva. You are free of samsara.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then your job is to get rid of these knowledge obscurations from the 8th to the 10th stage so you can become a Buddha. Mm-hmm. So if you're working to get rid of knowledge obscurations and you're free of samsara, then is your actions not contaminated?
Yeah, that's correct. You actually would not have any of the contamination of ignorance any longer. So essentially, you would be, again, you're equivalent to what we would call an arhat at that point. We usually don't give the name arhat to those who are 8th ground and above bodhisattvas, because again, that's not their final goal. They're not trying to achieve that on a Hinayana path. They're trying to achieve the path of no more learning, Buddhahood on the Mahayana path. But essentially, they don't have any ignorance operative in their mind. They don't create any contaminated karma. Of course, they haven't created contaminated karma for a while, it said, because of the realization of emptiness would preclude them from engaging in that type of thinking and behavior. But they are no longer under the control of any of those factors. They would continue to take rebirth as necessary through the force of their compassion to continue to develop their minds through those 3 grounds and eventually attain Buddhahood. But absolutely, we would say that their minds are not contaminated in the way that we talk about contaminated karma being together with ignorance. They still have these subtle contaminations, if you will. We usually just call them, again, the knowledge obscurations that are causing them to have this false appearance and are blocking them from attaining Buddhahood.
So that's what I'm trying to understand is, so then, the appearance of seeing things independently existing. So it's like, so what's the problem then? You're not doing, there's no harm. You're not doing anything that's contaminated. You're free of samsara. So what's the big deal about seeing things as independently existing, so subtly at that point?
The big deal is that you can't then help others because you don't have an omniscient mind. See, again, for the Bodhisattva, that's why it was spelled out on that one page, that for the practitioner in the context of this text and, the Bodhisattva, their main obstacle is the knowledge obstructions. Why? Because that is what keeps you from having the omniscient mind of a Buddha. It's kind of like, again, as long as we have those imprints in our mind that keep us in this bound state where everything is going to appear to inherently exist, we cannot know the two truths simultaneously. They are often called, I mean, that's sometimes how they describe the knowledge obscurations, is they are what keep you from having simultaneous knowledge of the two truths. For the Bodhisattva on that chart, when they go into the herringbone, that's the meditative equipoise, they go into a meditation on emptiness. All that appears to their mind is emptiness. They say it's like water poured into water, to where there's no subjective sense of a person, of a mind realizing emptiness. It's all like merging into emptiness, so that the only thing that is appearing is ultimate truth. But then they come out of that in that section that is until you get to the next herringbone, and they're in what's called subsequent attainment. Then everything else is conventional and is appearing to them, but it's all appearing as if it existed inherently, even though they know in their minds that it doesn't exist that way at all. So they are blocked from really knowing the two truths simultaneously, because they're either going to be in meditative equipoise, realizing emptiness directly, or they're going to be outside of meditative equipoise with everything appearing as if it was real. And so until they remove those subtlest obscurations, they don't have the ability to accomplish perfect knowledge of the two truths. Now, why do you need perfect knowledge of the true truths? Again, because that's what allows you to become beneficial to others, is because if you know all phenomena, then you know the intricacies of karma of every single sentient being. You know exactly how to benefit them. And again, a Buddha's mind is not conceptual. A Buddha's mind doesn't go, oh, there's Sheila, and I know what Sheila's been up to, and I know what her karmic predispositions are, and what her afflictions are, and I know how I need to help her then. Buddha just does it automatically. They often compare the Buddha to like the sun in the sky. The Buddha doesn't think, oh, I'm going to send sun down in New York, but I'm not going to send it down in Miami. The Buddha it's the sun is just shining. It depends upon Miami and New York and what's going on. You have a lot of clouds. Are you inside and not out in the rays of the sun? It's all dependent upon the beings. It's not dependent upon the sun. The sun is always shining. The Buddha's like that. The Buddha is always sending out enlightened activity to benefit others. And what blocks you from doing that are these knowledge obscurations, because you don't have the perfect knowledge to be able to benefit all sentient beings simultaneously and effortlessly. So for the Bodhisattva, that's the problem, because they aren't after just achieving their own freedom from stuff and, oh, no more contaminated karma, no more cycling in existence. That's the goal of the Hinayana. That wouldn't be the goal of the Mahayana. Does that make sense?
Yeah, very much. I think it's just, it is so inconceivable. Like, what does that mean, knowing two truths simultaneously? It's
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned last week, there's a wonderful chapter in Guy Newland's book on the two truths about omniscience and what a Buddha's mind is like, but it's way beyond our conceptual
yeah.
understanding of what that must be like. But, it sounds preferable to the mind I have right now. So
Thank you.
thank you for that question, Sneh. Anyone else, anything from tonight or anything else that's pertinent to our studies?
I
Yes. Hi. I'm not sure who's talking.
it's
Oh, there, Francesco. There's a lot of people on screen tonight. It takes me a while. Okay.
I was thinking something about the selflessness, and somehow I was following this train of thought that I was somehow grasping a little bit in these years about selflessness. And tonight I was thinking, well, but what happened for the reincarnation, and why, or even karma is following in through reincarnation? But then obviously I realized that we are all reincarnated already, so I don't have to follow the selflessness in the future lives. But I have somehow this I have to think about, meditate on this thought that what goes in the following life is still selflessness, emptiness, while I was more concentrated in today, in this life, and not thinking about that even the future life, my future reincarnation will have to and will be empty anyway, while I was thinking that something was bringing me to the next life. I don't know, it's a strange thought maybe, but this is what I was thinking.
I'm not sure I caught all of it, Francesco, but I mean, I think again, when we look at this whole idea of the whole structure of rebirth and karma and everything, that's conventional truth. And there is an element of truth to it in the sense that things do still happen. That's the whole idea of dependent arising, that everything depends upon its causes and conditions and, parts and imputation, all these various levels that we talk about. We'll get into that a little bit later in more detail. The whole thing about the two truths is that they are upheld as both essential parts of existence, that there is this appearance of things that's going on, and then there is the lack of their inherent existence, the lack of them existing in this true way that they appear to. So in no way when we realize emptiness does it negate all of that other kind of going on. It's just, again, by realizing emptiness, we can influence what's happening over there. We can undermine our, taking rebirth and having to go from life to life and all of that. And we can undermine our being locked in this unenlightened state and eventually being able then to, help all sentient beings. So the whole idea is that all of conventional reality, in a sense, is upheld within it, but it's not the final way that things exist. It is the basis upon which that emptiness is established. Everything still exists. The Buddha never said things are empty of being functional. The Buddha said they are empty of having inherent existence. So things still exist. But yeah, I mean, and everything that we do then matters greatly what we do. Every single thought that is generated in our minds, because everything informs what happens on a conventional level. And of course, that gives rise to our ability to understand the ultimate level. If we don't create proper conditions to be able to have a good rebirth, will we be able to continue this type of investigation and in looking at selflessness in greater detail and being able to achieve, those direct realizations, meditative equipoise that realizes emptiness and removes our afflictive obscurations and our knowledge obscurations. We have to be attentive to everything within conventional reality. I'm always really heartened by something that was in Elizabeth Napper's book, where she says that Tsongkhapa had an appearance of Manjushri to him, his guru appearing in this magnificent form. This is one way that Buddhas can help beings that have removed some of their cataracts of ignorance. They can have these amazing, beautiful visions of these beings that give them teachings. And Manjushri told him, value conventionalities, value the conventional, because at some level it can't be thrown out. It's not like once you realize ultimate truth, conventional truth doesn't matter at all, conventional reality. Everything is happening within these being part and parcel of each other. In the Heart Sutra, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. They're together with each other. The one thing when I showed that little basis, path, and result, at the basis level, they are completely, part and parcel. I was trying to emphasize that a little bit when I went through the chart. You can't have a conventional truth established without its emptiness. And the emptiness is contingent upon having something that is the basis of that emptiness. That's why we always talk about them being kind of, inextricably bound up with each other. So the whole idea, again, is we have to be attentive to, respect, and value the conventional within the understanding of emptiness. Otherwise, our view of emptiness isn't really correct. So I don't know if that's what you were getting at with some of your question. That's what my thoughts were, was just, we still have to think about, well, what kind of rebirth am I going to have? That's why the path to enlightenment is so magnificent, because it teaches us to work with embracing the conventional within the idea that we do eventually have to understand how all of that conventionality, how that exists, and get to that deeper understanding of ultimate truth. But you can't do it without depending upon conventional reality. You can't, get there without being in this world embodied and dealing with all of the stuff we have to deal with. So I don't know. I hope that helps a little bit. Any other final questions tonight? Maybe one more if somebody has one. Yeah, Jennifer?
Oh, unless Richard?
Richard? No. If you end up with a question that didn't get answered, please write it down or send it to me and I'll make sure I address it.
Go, Jennifer, please.
I had a related question to that, because in the past I would always, when they had tulkus or, beings being reincarnated out of compassion, I sort of imagined them with these, defiled aggregates, but they're babies sort of doing it. And, they say, oh, you have to learn everything again, and they get tutors and everything like that. But now that I'm, listening to these teachings more, those high level bodhisattvas or Buddhas, is it, I'm just trying to understand how a compassionate rebirth works. Is it like an illusion you know, that each being with the karma with the karmic connection, with each sentient being with the karmic connection of that bodhisattva, is it really just an illusory display manifesting based on our karma?
Wow, I don't know if I can answer that question. I mean, I think at some level, it's as real as everything else is real. I don't think we want to go to some point of just saying that it's just, because even if we talk about that, Manjushri appearing to Lama Tsongkhapa, based on Lama Tsongkhapa's karma, it was an appearance to him that would be just as real to him as you and I are to each other. I don't think that we, can definitely say, but if we look at something like a tulku, a reincarnated Lama in our world, where you see, and maybe if we do hold that to be a Buddha, who is showing that aspect of being, born from the womb and then going through being a baby and screaming and, soiling its diapers and whatever, all the way up to, this amazing being on a throne that can teach the Dharma perfectly, what have you. These again are due to our karma, absolutely. They are a manifestation that is directly in line with the karma of us as human beings to experience that. But we can purify our karma to be like Lama Tsongkhapa and then have these beatific visions of, Manjushri appearing before us and, removing our ignorance with a flaming sword or whatever. So I don't know. I mean, these are everything is karmic appearance at some level. And you get into the tantric teachings, and of course, then you start, understanding another level of how things are appearing on the basis of that presentation. But essentially, everything has a level of appearance to it without any sort of substantial reality. And that's why we can achieve realizations on the tantric path in particular, is because what we're grasping to as ordinary appearance doesn't exist in that ordinary way at all, because we can purify our karma to have a totally different experience of that. But whether others have that same experience is really in their own karma. Remember the story, I won't go into the detailed story, but of Asanga, when he was waiting for Maitreya Buddha to appear, his guru to appear, and he had meditated like 12 years in a cave, and he got tired every 3 years. He came out and there was still no appearance of Maitreya, and so he went down to town and he sees this dog that's wounded backside to the dog, and there's maggots on it and everything, and he's moved by compassion so much for this dog that he wants to remove the maggots and help the dog heal. And anyway, to cut it short, Maitreya appears when he's having this really compassionate experience of reaching out to aid this dog. But they say that all the beings around him, some of them didn't even see the dog. There was one old woman, they said, whose karma was fairly pure, and she saw the dog with the maggots. But it took all of that for a Sangha to be able to see Maitreya Buddha. So it gets to be hard to say, what is appearance? Everything's appearance, everything's karmic appearance. What we are having as a sort of a human experience with human karma is shared to some degree, but it's also very unique to us, because we can go to something and have a very different experience than everyone else who's there because of our karma. Like you can go hear teachings by His Holiness, and some people walk away and they go, "Wow, did you hear that part about this?" And you go, "I don't even remember him saying that." And so we all have a bit different experience to some degree of what we call reality. I think that's really getting at what our ignorance is thinking that there's some sort of unified thing that is what is appearing, that is established as what it is appearing to us. And that is part of our ignorance, is thinking that it's sort of fixed. And of course, in Tantra, that's where you really start to work with that idea of this view of ordinary appearance is, created by karma that can be completely purified. We can have the experience of a Buddha. Just have to, again, create the causes and conditions for that. So that's two, where we unite both of those, the wisdom, understanding how things actually exist, and then the, how we can manipulate things to achieve a different effect within the understanding of all of that. So I don't know if that helps. So I don't know, maybe John Landau can share something on it. I see John Landau's with us tonight. I feel honored that he's here listening to me. He's such an amazing teacher. So, but anyway, I won't put him on the spot. But if he has anything to share, please, it would be wonderful. So, okay. Anyway, I think perhaps we've had enough. Richard, did you have something real quick, or did you
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Okay.
Well, I'll either follow up or ask it another time.
Okay. All right, let's go ahead and do our dedication prayers. And again, I was happy to see that Sheila organized the meeting in advance for like a half hour before to discuss things. I'll put together some homework questions in that. Hopefully I'll get it done fairly soon. I'm at my mom's right now and I'm going to be traveling back on Wednesday. And so I don't know if I'll have time before I leave, but I'll get to it as soon as I can. And you'll at least have those to take a look at. And if you'd like to meet again in half hour in advance of this session and discuss some of those questions or anything else that's going on. And if you formulate questions out of that, again, please be sure to put them in the chat box or something, or make sure that get a chance to ask them, because I'm always happy to take questions and I'll try to create the space for that in each one of these classes. So, all right, so let me see, how do I get to my prayers?
I want to give credit to Sine because she was really the catalyst behind starting the discussion group before class.
Oh, great. Thanks, Sine. Yeah. Okay, let's do our dedication prayers. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. And then the prayer to strengthen our Bodhichitta. May the supreme jewel Bodhichitta that has not arisen arise and grow. And may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. And then the prayers for our teachers. Again, if we were talking about, if these are Buddhas appearing in this world, it's our karma that is causing them to appear in this world. So we have to create the causes from our side by making these strong prayers for His Holiness Lama Zopa, all of our other gurus, to continue to be in this world, to help us and others to achieve enlightenment. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Then for Rinpoche, you who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And then let's take a moment to dedicate for all of those beings that we're holding in our hearts right now. Again, those that we know who are experiencing obstacles, illness, who are dying or who have died. You might in particular think about Geshe Sherab. I hear he's recovering quite well, is out of hospital. But in him, as well as all the other monks, nuns, and so on, and Kopan and what have you, who have succumbed to COVID, make strong prayers for them, as well as all those in the world, especially those parts of the world where COVID is really causing so much destruction, so many people dying, getting ill, and so on. Again, all those beings we dedicate for their welfare. Send this positive energy out to them so they can be free from their suffering and that they can have all the causes that will lead them on the path to perfect enlightenment. And may all beings achieve the perfection of themselves through what we have done here tonight. May they all achieve Buddhahood. Okay, wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining me. I'll be in my regular setting next Wednesday. And and Glenn Swenson's mother passed away. Oh, thank you for letting me know that. Yeah, Glenn was my roommate for a good part of the master's program. He and I were in the same cohort, that first master's program. So I'll send him a little message. But thank you for letting me know that. Oh, and wow, there's a wonderful course coming up with Guy Newland. Didn't know about that. At Shantideva. Great, thanks for announcing that. All right, everyone, take care, be well. And again, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And blessings to you all. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.